Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of 51 Stories of Emotional Wellbeing with Emotional Ability Resources. Today, I have with me Joy Bittner, a very seasoned mental health practitioner who originally is from the United States but is currently working in Latin America for the last 15 years. She has created the nonprofit Vida Plena to provide mental health care services to all people regardless of their economic circumstances. Welcome to the show, Joy. It's a pleasure to have you here with me today.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. And I'm just really excited to have a chance to talk about this. Obviously, mental health is a topic that we both care about very much, and looking forward to exploring it a little bit further.
Great. So tell us a little bit about Joy, the young girl. How was it when you were growing up? Some of the challenges that you shaped, that have shaped you into the person that you are today. I would love to know about that.
Yeah, so kind of broadly, as you mentioned, I grew up in the US in a pretty standard kind of suburban setting. But what was interesting about where I grew up was that my town, I remember reading a statistic somewhere that in the high school has some of the largest number of different languages spoken between having first and second generation immigrants. And so I think that was just a really unique space that gave me an opportunity to come in contact and find it completely normal. People who came, or their parents came from Africa, from Asia, from Latin America, really just like a large number of different places. And so I think that just really shaped my views very early on, that learning from other people is just fun and kind of wonderful.
So that's really nice, because a lot of people tend to get straitjacketed while they are growing up. It's people who look like them, who speak like them, and who think like them. And to have that exposure so early in life, how did that shape you into the person that you are today?
I'd say it just gave a sense of like interest and curiosity for other places and other cultures. And so that a little bit led to where I am now, which is I've been living and working in Ecuador for the last 10 years, but spent about 15 years kind of throughout Latin America. But then, for example, the way you and I met each other was through the Global Mental Health Leadership course being offered by Sandgath, which I think was such an interesting experience for all of us classmates to be able to kind of have a give and take and learn from each other and connect with people who also care about global mental health throughout the world. And so kind of gave a chance. So it's kind of like this continuation. And it was one of those experiences that just really made me so excited to see what people in other countries and other contexts are doing and be able to learn from them and their experiences, with the idea that it can be applied here, and hopefully then I'd be able to have things to share as well. So
Yeah.
I'm curious, what were some of how did you find the course? What were some of the interesting takeaways you got from it?
I think I agree with you totally. And apart from that, what I realized is this chance to kind of bring our shared humanity and our experience into a global setting is the way forward. We can't really be straitjacketed. See, you were lucky while you were growing up where you met immigrants. I don't remember meeting anybody till I was probably in college. It just did not happen. It was people who looked like me, who thought like me. So you kind of get straitjacketed, even though we like to think we are open and flexible. But such courses make you realize that the world is indeed an oyster and much bigger than any of us can fathom. And when we come together, we really learn so much, and we can synergize in ways in which everybody benefits. And ultimately, people in low resource settings where you work, where I work, they need to be benefited, because we don't know who can be of help, what can be of help. So yes, that's what was my personal realization after our Sangat course, And I think I personally developed a more global way of looking at problems or mental health intervention, especially because before that I used to be very local and indigenous in my approach. And with mental health, we've always grown up thinking that yes, it's something where you sit across the person and you talk. But the pandemic taught us, and then such leadership courses also teach us that no, that's not necessarily true. That's just one aspect.
Yeah. And I think that's what I love so much, what you're talking about, that kind of bringing in different models of mental health. And I think that's what Sangath is really promoting. And they have developed this incredible body of evidence behind what they're doing. And then that's what I'm trying to be able to adapt and bring in here. I really just feel that there's the possibility of expanding who is a mental health practitioner. There's obviously the formally trained person who's a psychologist, a social worker, but the evidence is showing that there's great possibility of bringing in local community members who are also able to make significant improvements in the people that they're working with and the people that they're talking with. And so I think those are skills there that we can all kind of learn. And I think that's what Sangath is doing and has demonstrated so much. And I'm excited to be able to put those lessons that they've learned into action here.
Great. So while we are talking professionally, I want you to tell me a little bit about your personal journey. Any struggles that you have had, which you feel you've overcome with your emotional ability, resources, or by looking after yourself? Please share with all of us here.
Yeah, so just a little bit professionally, my background, undergrad, I studied psychology, and then I went on to do 2 separate masters, one in social work and a separate one in nonprofit management. And I think the first thing to kind of put out there is just dispel this notion that because someone is working in mental health means that they'll have it all figured out, and that you have to have it all figured out. Think the people who are most honest about where they're coming from and the struggles that they're facing are best then able to help the people they're working with. And so just because you're a psychologist or a social worker or a counselor of any kind, it doesn't mean that you won't still have your ups and downs yourself. And I think that is really first kind of a foremost important piece to put out there. And then also, I think the second kind of piece to put out there is that it's normal to have fluctuations and ups and downs and ebbs and flows. Those are just part of the normal life. And I think sometimes we hope that if we put in the perfect set of practices, the perfect morning routine, the perfect set of structures, we can somehow insulate ourselves from that 100%. And I think that those practices and those activities are very important and they make a huge difference, but there's still sort of like challenges that are kind of coming and going. So I think that's like the case for myself. So I'm talking in generalities, but I think life transitions are one of the places that most often we can see like challenges in mental health. And a significant life transition for me that I look back on was leaving my undergraduate college experience, which was kind of like a nice cocoon. After 4 years, you develop a lot of strong social connections. And then I moved to New York City to study social work. And so suddenly I was in a big space and having to make new friends and kind of negotiate a whole new place. And it was really challenging. It was challenging to build those social connections at first that are so critical, that close group of friends. And so that was a time where, it was kind of be facing those own challenges. And I think it's good to be forgiving of ourselves in those spaces when you recognize I'm going through a significant change, whether it's a new move or a new job, or it could even be changes, things we want. Very often it's having a baby and positive things too, but those role changes can bring about a lot of disruption in our life, anticipated and not, positive and not, and that can cause a lot of challenges. So for myself, what really helped was I did have one friend who highly encouraged me, and I think this is demonstrated in the evidence, to really reach out beyond myself and seek to make social connections, and kind of pointed out, like, Joy, everybody's a little bit lonely, but everyone's a little bit afraid to make that first effort. So you have to be the one to make that first effort. And just that small piece of advice was transformative for me. It made the difference that, like, opposed to just kind of going to class and sitting there, I would make the effort to talk to the person next to me, or see if they wanted to get lunch, or ask to study together. And so to kind of start to build those social networks really just made a huge difference. And even if it didn't result in like, okay, we started to actually build a friendship, there's a tremendous body of evidence that shows that just those small social interactions where we actually have like a tiny but human connection with somebody makes a tremendous difference in our overall feelings of well-being. And so, yeah, those are kind of just like some small, like one kind of example, but and some of the techniques that I use to get through it. But I think those are types of things that are applicable to people in all sorts of circumstances.
And that's so pertinent what you're talking about. We take these little things for granted, like just reaching out to somebody and saying hello. And sometimes that's all it takes to experience emotional well being in a difficult situation where there are transitions, there are relationship challenges, there is day to day living to cope up with, there's a sense of fear of the unknown which gets activated. So, thank you for sharing that, and what I've realized just through these talks is, it's simplest things which help each one of us, whether we are aware of it or not. So, any particular inspiring story that you have come across of somebody's, in your career that you want to talk to others about, where you feel that people just worked on themselves and that really helped them feel good and, could inspire everybody listening to us today?
Yeah, I think there's definitely like we think of like there's the people that you could hold up who are celebrities or politicians and are famous and they've overcome amazing things. But I think the stories of people that are most inspiring to us are the people in your own individual world. And one of the people who have been really critical in my life was my college roommate. Her name's Kate, and she's talks very openly about how she from high school onward struggled with depression and took antidepressants through most of her life. And she has been such an incredible teacher to me in how to that in that journey and the way she's kind of openly talked about that, what those struggles look like, and but then also that there's a source of hope. Um, Even being a person as she struggled with in the past chronic depression, she's found that there are very critical tools that you can put in place in your life and practices and techniques that, again, like it doesn't mean that you'll never have moments of sadness or challenges or setbacks, because those are just partly natural, but that it doesn't have to develop then into a full-blown depression that threatens to take over every aspect of your life. And so learning kind of what those early warning signs are, and then learning what the important techniques and practices you need to put in. She's just really helped me in my own life to understand that better, and has been a phenomenal example to me in how that's been. And so kind of just has done has really done the work to think about it in her own life, and now has developed a practice to be able to teach other people to do that as well. And so, yeah, I'd say she's definitely, sorry about that, definitely the person in my life I would look to as kind of one of my greatest inspirations, and what it can look like to live, to overcome, but still be living with, but still have the most fulfilled life possible. And so, yeah, I just grateful to her, to Kate, in all these ways that she's shared with me and she's taught me.
That's just so pertinent. A lot of times we discount people. I'm not saying you and me do it because we've been working in the field, but generally, and I hope all our viewers, realize that we discount people who are going through some kind of a mental health issue. We are like, how can we get inspired? But sometimes the way they make their life fulfilling, they have the courage to seek help. They have the courage to talk about their struggles, which many a times we hold our sorrows or our issues as though they are weighed in gold and they have to be stacked in the bank, not to be shared with anybody. So yes, so sometimes just this simplicity or just the courage to share our own story, if somebody close to us does it, inspires us so deeply. And could you give some tips to everybody watching us today where you feel they could look after their emotional well-being on a daily basis?
Yeah, and I think just that you're saying, opening up those spaces, it doesn't have to be some people feel that it's a public platform. They want to talk about it on social media, but just even having those like close conversations just brings in a different sort of like depth to a conversation. I noticed that like when someone is willing to take that brave step and just kind of share with me a little bit about their background and where they've been, it immediately develops like a degree of social closeness. I feel like much closer to them. And then it gives me kind of like the safe space of wanting to be able to do the same. And so then I can also just talk about where I've been and kind of the things that I've been through too. But it takes someone to be that kind of make that brave first step. And I really, yeah, admire that so much for people who are willing to do that and doing that in a sensitive way, obviously being careful, thinking about the circumstances and not like over dumping on a person right at the beginning, but kind of like those, if there's like mutual sharing. And so using that as a way to build connection and true genuine relationships. I think when we're honest and vulnerable with each other and both sides, that's when like real like healing happens and real kind of like connection happens. And I think that's really what we're all looking for, right? Is having real meaningful connections with the people around us. And taking that first step is part of the way to do it. So yeah. I'd be curious to hear like in your own story, like how have you found like there's been moments where people have done that and it's changed sort of the dialogue or changed the dynamic in a good way?
Yeah, and one of the greatest needs that we human beings have is the need to belong. So the moment someone shares their own story, we feel as though they are letting us see them as they are, and our need to belong, our shared humanity comes up front. And are there any books which have inspired you, or somebody whom you really like listening to, who you feel gives you a lot of strength on a daily basis that you want to talk about?
Hmm. Um, Books or individuals? Yeah, I guess. Well, there's a couple of resources I would love to point out to just individuals. There is a teacher, a professor from Yale University, Laurie Santos, and she offers a free course on the platform Coursera, and it's based on positive psychology. And it's I believe it's called the Science of Happiness. And she has a great podcast, just really looking, and it's a completely free course. Then she has a whole podcast, and so Laurie Santos, and she's just really done a great job in breaking down the evidence from positive psychology into how that can be put in practice on a daily basis. And then there's another great organization called the Action for Happiness. They have groups that meet informally, completely free to join. And they also, again, are taking the evidence from positive psychology and breaking it down into daily, kind of monthly practices that you're working on. And so some of these things are gratitude and empathy and being active. And so it's taking those things that have, so what I love about mental health, I think mental health has kind of traditionally mental health has looked at like what are the problems that people are facing and how do we help them overcome them. And this whole new branch of mental health psychology, specifically called positive psychology, which is really looking at what does it take to live a good, flourishing life, and not just what are our sort of intuitions, which may be correct, but also like what is actually kind of the evidence, the social science say behind that. And so kind of like knowing what some of those things are. Honestly, many of those things are common sense things, but kind of just knowing how that behind that means you have the knowledge and then the power to be able to implement that in your own life. And so I think those are the types of things that really have helped me and encouraged me along the way. Is like the idea that happiness and sort of this like well-being and overall well-being, emotional well-being, physical well-being, but really just like the idea of flourishing, it isn't something that just happens to happen like magically or by luck. It is something that we can choose to build into our life. It takes effort. It's not easy, but it is something that we have control over and we have the ability to develop. And sort of like somebody who decides they really want to have the perfect body. And so they start going to the gym and they start with lower weights, or they want to become able to run a marathon. You start by walking and then you walk further distances, then you slowly add jogs in. And so I think it's the same idea. We can build up these muscles and these sort of like strengths. And so I think it's more than just like rising beyond like mental illness. It's what does it take to build a life that is like meaningful and fulfilling in sort of all aspects. And yeah, that's what I get really excited about, is like working with people and having kind of conversations about like, what does that mean?
Mhm.
And how do you implement that in your kind of day to day?
I
And
think that's
so,
really pertinent. You work in a setting, we've spoken about it before, which is economically very challenged most of the time, right? People there face a lot of difficulties. Any anecdotes or any tale of flourishing that comes to your mind, someone who has inspired you? Because a lot of times I feel I personally get inspired by trainees in my workshop or people who come for therapy, while I am helping them, there are sometimes their own journey of courage and resilience. I learn a lot from them. So, any anecdotes or any person's story that you would like to tell us about would be wonderful.
yeah. So I originally came to Ecuador because I was running a fair trade company
Mhm.
that worked with indigenous artisans, mostly women who make handmade jewelry. And so a big part of that was spending a lot of time in people's homes, sitting around kitchen tables, stringing beads, making things together. Um, and so naturally, as you're just spending hours and hours together, you start to get to know people's stories. And there was one woman in particular, and just to be like sensitive for identity, I'll just call her Maria. But she opened up and kind of shared with me a bit about some of the struggles that she faced in her life. And quite tragically, her husband had taken his life, and so just sort of like the fallout of that and what had happened, but then also the source of like resilience she had demonstrated. The fact that she had several small children, and the fact that she decided how she was going to very intentionally continue to support them and move forward and take on the role of being the primary breadwinner, and what that looked like in her life. And she's just really became like is a source of inspiration to me, in the sense that in the face of challenges, and she would come from what would be statistically described as an economically deprived background, um, but not letting those types of things hold her back. And so I think for her, sort of like some of the strength of her resilience came from the people that she had in her life, some ties in her family or community, but then just very much like that sense of purpose that she had of like knowing. And I think we all need to find whatever that is for us. And for her, it was very much like, for many people, her kids, and knowing that she had to continue to be there for her kids and continue to support her kids. And so really happy to say that we were able to get her a full-time position working with the jewelry company, which helped to kind of smooth over some of the economic challenges that her family was facing. But that said, there were still like other challenges that came along the way of becoming a single mom and having like just typical adolescent issues and things that happened. And so it was trying then to see how we could connect her with other community resources and things like that. But yeah, just to the power of the human spirit. I think we can all know in our own lives, like people who have faced tremendous challenges and then not let that held them back. And so, yeah, yeah, she's somebody that really stands out. And I think, a side note, as I think that you've seen in your life and probably in your work, but I think there's often this perception in sort of high income countries such as the US or Europe and the UK, that people in low and middle income countries don't face any sort of like mental health struggles. There's a bit of this like nice fantasy that people might be poor but yet happy, and they're happy, maybe they're happy because they're poor, perhaps, this sort of like fantasy that exists. And it just really doesn't play out in terms of realities. For example, in Latin America, official depression statistics from the World Health Organization are basically on par with the US.
Mhm.
And in some ways, I think that's probably a little bit even maybe unrepresented, underreported, because when you look at many of the trigger factors to depression, it's things like loss of work, inability to get work, and kind of living in poverty. And so these factors are often triggers to depression. And so I think, unfortunately, there are different challenges that exist. And so just kind of like, I'd like to kind of highlight that kind of like perception that's like this nice fantasy, but unfortunately is not match up with reality, that basically mental health exists across the spectrum of the world. And we have demonstrated therapies, which is like a big part of what we were looking at going back to the Sandgath course, of like there are demonstrated interventions and possibilities to be able to address those issues. They're evidence-based, they're proven, they're tried, but it's a matter of implementing them at scale and in a number of different contexts. And so, so kind of like looping around, challenges exist every place, but there are solutions that we do know and we have found. And so it's just a matter of getting them to the people who need them.
Very true. Getting people the right kind of help at the right time is something that all of us can do. So, can you tell us a little bit about some of the interventions that you have put in use, in Latin America, which are very useful and which perhaps can help others also?
Yeah, so I am working on building a new program, a nonprofit called Vida Plena, which means a flourishing life in Spanish. And we're implementing a model very similar to what is uh, supported by Sandgath, which is training local community members. They don't have to previously have any type of professional mental health training. They don't even have to have a high school degree, but to be able to provide group therapy. And then in addition, I am specifically working with Columbia University out of New York, the Global Mental Health Lab, and their incredible team there to be able to specifically provide interpersonal group therapy, which is really focusing on looking at the interplay between people's depression and their relationships, and how the relationships impacts their depression and how the depression impacts their relationships. And so what it looks like is there are 9 sessions, and it's a group setting. We're meeting in local neighborhoods, kind of close and convenient to where people live, in community centers and churches, schools. And then people come together and for about an hour and a half, 2 hours, have an opportunity to learn new techniques. And so it's very much focused on where the person is at currently, to be able to manage and address some of really just like the symptoms and the actual in the moment life that person is facing. And so compared to kind of stereotypes of old school Freudian psychotherapy, we're not going into somebody's like deep dark childhood and mother and all, those kind of like stereotypes of that type of psychology. This is very much focused in the moment and focused on finding solutions to the problems that the person is facing in the moment. And I think from that, like there's many practical techniques that people can learn and kind of even research themselves. Part of that, a lot of overlap with cognitive behavioral therapy. And for people who are interested, there's a great amount of like resources online around cognitive behavioral therapy. And you can almost, in some ways, like counsel yourself. And so it's a lot of like doing self-reflective activities and looking for erroneous beliefs in your own patterns of thinking and being able to kind of check those. And so the benefit of doing it in the group setting is then you have a little bit of opportunity to get an outside perspective. But honestly, that is the type of thing that you can do with a close friend, somebody that you trust. And so to be able to kind of like, just kind of like check your realities, like when's kind of like relating back. And so one of the techniques is, for example, relating back, perhaps like a discussion or a fight that you had with, say, your partner or someone close to you, a family member, and kind of relating the conversation, but not so much from I'm the victim and what did they do wrong, but like, help me see this from a different perspective, someone else, like a more objective perspective, and having that trusted friend come in and be like, help provide you a different sort of viewpoint. And so these are types of things, again, is fairly common sense, but it's the matter of building that in intentionally. And then I think also part of that is selecting the friend who won't just be like 100% on your side, like, yeah, that person's terrible, but really will be able to have that objective viewpoint if you're truly trying to seek that type of growth and new perspective. And so, so I think that's a very kind of sort of concrete technique that we're using in the Vida Plena program, but that anyone could use in their everyday sort of life. So how about for you? Are there techniques that you particularly have seen from like your training and any sort of like more formal practice that you think are really easily applicable to across the board?
You know what I have seen really work is the power of storytelling. And especially in India, I have seen there are a lot of folklores which talk of resilience, that used to work. Coming to me personally, I think some of the books, what we need is books which help people have conversations about mental health. I personally use them. So it's very easy to make them evidence based. And also, they help break barriers. People don't feel targeted and people feel I can share as much as I want to. They go as deep as they are ready to without really feeling enmeshed or feeling overwhelmed, about wanting to share. So I personally have seen a lot of benefit with that.
I think that just like speaks to who we are as humans. Like there's value in statistics in the sense of kind of conveying the scale of a problem. But what we connect with are humans, right? We connect with people, we connect with their stories. And I think that's who we are. We are constantly just looking for those connections. And that's just part of our innate identity, is connecting with people, and we are our stories, right? Who we've come from and where we've been. And so that completely makes sense. And so helping people to be able to tell their own story in a meaningful way that is not just like cathartic, and that there's catharsis in the telling of the story, but then there's learning to be gained from the other person. When we all just learn from the people in our lives. When your friend tells you like, oh, I tried this thing, that's a small story, and then you're willing to more open to try it. And so yeah, I really agree with that. I think that's a great technique. I love.
It's been wonderful chatting with you, Joy. So before I sign off, if there was one word in which you could describe joy, what would you pick and why?
Yeah, well, I obviously come with a pre-made name, and so it's kind of nice that way. But I suppose what I would love to kind of talk kind of from there, I'll just kind of talk about kind of what I consider to be my three core values, and really what I'm trying to build into the Vida Plena program. As the first one in my personal value, I describe as love, and just like desire to connect with people and putting relationships, really making relationships the primary thing. I think at the end of the day, we all deep down know that is what matters. And so what that looks like in Vida Plena is the program model, as I mentioned, specifically group therapy. And then it's really just a focus on the actual individuals that we're seeking to help. At the end of the day, it's not about like having numbers or having these metrics. It's really about who are the lives that we're impacting. So that's kind of like the first value. The second value personally for me is just is beauty. And so that kind of comes through with just being able to see beauty in everyday life and making that part of how we live. And I think what that comes through in Vida Plena is one of the activities, one of the practices is gratitude, and just being grateful for the things that are around us, and the people, the circumstances. And then kind of my last value is personally is I call it adventure, and this desire to do new things. And I think that comes out as like a personal value practice in Vida Plena is kind of sense of curiosity. So the organization being open to research, being open to learning both from the people that we're serving, learning from the local communities, and just having this broader sort of curiosity and openness to what they have to teach us. And so it's kind of like how my personal values, and so sorry you said one, but here's three, and then how they kind of like play out in what Vida Plena is and what that looks like. And so at the end of the day, like I said, Vida Plena means flourishing life. And I think that is what we are all seeking in our individual lives. And Vida Plena as a program seeks to help empower people to truly be able to live that out in their own lives as well.
Thank you so much. It's just been wonderful chatting with you. Take care and have a lovely day.
Yeah, great fun. Thanks so much. Take care as well.